At 0700 on January 24, 1945, First Lieutenant Garland Merle Connor stood in the frozen command post of 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, watching German artillery shells destroy the tree line 400 yards to his front. 25 years old, intelligence officer, recently returned from the hospital with wounds still healing. The German 19th Army had massed 600 infantry troops and 6 Mark VI Tiger tanks for a counterattack designed to break through the American positions near Husson, France. Connor was 5'6", 120 pounds, a tobacco farmer from Clinton County, Kentucky. He had never finished high school. The nearest school had been 15 miles from his family's farm. He had enlisted in March 1941. 4 years of war, 10 major campaigns, 4 amphibious assault landings, wounded 7 times. The last wound had sent him to the hospital 3 weeks ago. He had returned to his battalion 2 days earlier. 3rd Battalion held a section of the front line north of the Colmar Pocket. The Colmar Pocket was the last German-held territory in France. 850 square miles of frozen forest and farm fields west of the Rhine River. The Germans had held it since November. Every attempt to eliminate the pocket had failed. The French First Army had lost thousands of men trying to push the Germans back across the Rhine. Operation Nordwind had started on New Year's Day, the last major German offensive in the West. Hitler had ordered Army Group G to break through American lines in Alsace while the Battle of the Bulge still raged 300 miles north. The offensive had failed, but the Germans in the Colmar Pocket remained, and they were desperate. 3rd Battalion had been on the line for 18 days. Temperatures averaged 10 degrees below zero, no moonlight, snow covered everything. Soldiers slept in frozen foxholes when they could sleep at all. German patrols probed the American positions every night. The battalion had lost 43 men in 2 weeks, mostly to artillery and sniper fire. Connor worked in the battalion command post. An intelligence officer gathered information about enemy movements, interrogated prisoners, analyzed patrol reports, marked German positions on maps. It was not a combat role. Intelligence officers stayed behind the front line. They worked with maps and reports. They did not lead attacks. But Connor had not stayed behind the lines during 4 years of war. He had earned 4 Silver Stars for direct combat action. October 1943 in Italy, January 1944 at Anzio, September 1944 in France, February 1945. Each Silver Star represented an action where Connor had risked his life to save other soldiers. He had a reputation in 3rd Battalion. When the situation turned desperate, Connor moved forward. At 07:15, the German artillery barrage intensified. Shells walked across the battalion's forward positions. Trees exploded. Dirt and frozen earth fountained into the air. The barrage lasted 12 minutes. Then it stopped. Silence. Then the sound of tank engines. A runner burst into the command post. Germans advancing. 6 Tigers. Infantry behind them. Hundreds of infantry. Moving through the woods toward the battalion's left flank. The battalion commander looked at the map. If the Tigers reached the American positions, they would roll through the foxholes. The battalion would be overrun. There were no American tanks in position to stop them. No tank destroyers. The only weapon that could stop 6 Tigers was artillery. But artillery needed a forward observer. Someone who could see the Germans advancing. Someone who could adjust the fire. The forward observation post had been destroyed by the barrage. The observers were dead or wounded. No one could see the German advance from the command post. The trees blocked the view. If you want to see how Connor's decision turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories about forgotten heroes. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Connor. Connor studied the map. The German advance was coming through a section of woods 400 yards from the command post. To observe the attack, someone would have to run 400 yards across open ground, under German artillery fire, then stay in position ahead of the American line while 6 Tiger tanks and 600 German infantry advanced directly toward them. Connor picked up a telephone and 400 yards of wire. He looked at the battalion commander. Then he walked out of the command post into the snow. The German artillery barrage had stopped, but Connor knew it would resume. The Germans always fired preparation barrages before tank attacks. They would wait for their infantry to get closer, then the guns would open up again to pin down the defenders while the Tigers rolled forward. Connor ran. 400 yards of open ground between the command post and the front line. Snow covering frozen earth. The telephone wire unspooled behind him. He carried the spool in his left hand, the telephone handset in his right. His boots broke through the snow crust with each step. At 100 yards, the German guns opened fire. Shells landed 40 yards to his left, then 30 yards to his right. The Germans were adjusting. They had observers watching the open ground. They could see a lone American soldier running toward their attack. A shell hit a tree 70 yards ahead. The tree exploded. Splinters and branches and frozen wood fragments showered down. Connor kept running. Another shell landed 20 yards behind him. The concussion wave hit him like a fist. He stumbled, but did not fall. The wire kept unspooling. At 250 yards, a shell destroyed a tree directly in his path. The trunk split down the middle. Half the tree crashed down across the snow. Connor vaulted over the trunk without stopping. Shrapnel had torn through the branches. Pieces of hot metal hissed in the snow. Another shell. This one closer. 15 yards to his left. Frozen earth and snow geysered up. Chunks of dirt rained down on him. The blast wave hammered his eardrums. He could not hear his own breathing anymore, just a high-pitched ringing. He reached the American front line at 300 yards. Soldiers crouched in foxholes. They stared at him. An intelligence officer running toward the German advance with a telephone. He did not stop to explain. He kept running. Forward, toward the enemy. 30 yards beyond the American foxholes, Connor found what he needed. A shallow ditch. Maybe 18 inches deep. Not deep enough to stop bullets. Not deep enough to protect against artillery. But deep enough to give him a sight line toward the German advance while keeping his silhouette below the snow level. He dropped into the ditch. The telephone wire had held. He cranked the handset. The connection buzzed. Then a voice. The Artillery Fire Direction Center, 3 miles behind the front line. American 105mm howitzers, 12 guns. Enough firepower to shatter a German attack if the shells landed in the right place. Connor gave his position. The fire direction officer confirmed. Connor was now the eyes of 3rd Battalion's artillery. Everything depended on what he could see, and whether he could stay alive long enough to direct the guns. He raised his head above the ditch rim. The German infantry were 200 yards away, moving through the trees in squad formations, rifles at the ready. They advanced in short rushes. One squad would move while another provided covering fire. Professional soldiers, experienced. They knew how to attack through defended positions. Behind the infantry, the Tigers. Connor could see 4 of them, massive, 60-ton monsters pushing through the smaller trees like they were saplings. The Tigers stayed in the tree line, using the forest for cover. But they were coming. Slow, methodical. They would break into the open ground in minutes. The German infantry had not seen him yet. He was alone, 30 yards ahead of the American line, in a ditch that provided almost no protection, with a telephone and 600 German soldiers walking directly toward him. Connor lifted the handset. He gave the coordinates. Fire mission. Enemy infantry in the open. 600 meters. Adjusting. The first shells would arrive in 40 seconds. If the Germans spotted him before the shells landed, they would kill him before he could adjust the fire. If the shells landed too close to his position, they would kill him anyway. If the shells landed too far from the German advance, the attack would continue, and 600 Germans would overrun 3rd Battalion's positions. Connor watched the Germans advance. He counted the seconds. 38, 39, 40. The sky screamed. 12 105mm shells hit the tree line 150 yards behind the German infantry. Too far. Connor grabbed the handset. Drop 100. Fire for effect. The German infantry kept advancing. They had not reacted to the shells. Artillery landing behind an advance was normal. It meant the defenders were guessing. The Germans knew they had time before the Americans adjusted their fire. But Connor was not guessing. He could see every German soldier, every movement, every squad leader signaling his men forward. The second salvo arrived 18 seconds later. This time, the shells landed in the middle of the German formation. The forest erupted. Trees disintegrated. Shrapnel screamed through the air in every direction. The 105 shells carried 14 pounds of high explosive each. 12 shells, 168 pounds of explosive detonating simultaneously among 600 men packed into attack formations. German soldiers disappeared. Others went down. The advance stopped. Connor cranked the handset. Repeat fire. Same coordinates. Another salvo. Then another. The American guns were firing for effect now. Maximum rate of fire. 4 rounds per minute per gun. 48 shells every 60 seconds, hammering the same 200 square yards of forest. The German infantry scattered. Squad formations broke apart. Soldiers ran for cover. Some dove behind trees. Others tried to crawl away from the impact zone. The forest had become a killing ground. But the Tigers were still coming. Connor could see all 6 now. They had broken out of the tree line into open ground. The artillery had not touched them. 105 shells could damage a Tiger's tracks or optics, but they could not penetrate the armor. The Tigers needed direct hits, multiple direct hits, and even then, the shells might bounce off. The tanks advanced in a wedge formation, 2 in front, 2 behind them, 2 more bringing up the rear. Tank commanders stood in the turrets. They were scanning for targets, looking for American positions to engage. One of the Tigers fired. The 88mm gun cracked like thunder. The shell hit an American foxhole 300 yards to Connor's right. Dirt and snow exploded upward. The soldiers in that foxhole were dead. Another Tiger fired. Another foxhole obliterated. The Tigers were 300 yards from the American line. In 4 minutes they would reach the foxholes. Once they crossed the defensive line, 3rd Battalion would collapse. Tigers in the rear of American positions meant panic, rout, hundreds of soldiers running. The Germans would pursue. They would slaughter the retreating Americans. Then they would push deeper into the 6th Army Group's sector. The entire front could collapse. Connor shifted his fire mission. Enemy armor advancing. 250 meters. Adjust fire onto the tanks. The problem was precision. Artillery was not designed to kill tanks. Artillery saturated areas. It killed infantry in the open. It destroyed buildings. It cut communication lines. But tanks were small targets, fast targets, armored targets. The shells started falling around the Tigers. One shell landed 10 yards in front of the lead Tiger. The tank drove through the blast. Another shell hit behind the formation. The Tigers kept coming. Their commanders knew American 105s could not stop them. They would drive through the artillery and into the American positions. Connor needed the shells closer. Drop 50. Fire for effect. The next salvo landed among the Tigers. A shell hit the lead tank's right track. The track broke. The Tiger slewed hard right and stopped, immobilized, but still dangerous. The turret traversed. The 88mm gun was still operational. Another Tiger took a shell on the engine deck. Smoke began pouring from the rear of the tank. The crew might abandon it, or they might keep fighting. A disabled Tiger with a working gun was still a fortress. 4 Tigers were still advancing, and they had adjusted their course. They were moving toward Connor's position. The tank commanders had spotted his muzzle flashes. They had seen the telephone wire. They knew someone was directing the American artillery, and they were coming to kill him. Connor checked the ditch. 18 inches of cover. Not enough to stop an 88mm shell. Not enough to stop machine gun fire. Not enough to stop anything a Tiger tank could throw at him. The Germans were 150 yards away now. Close enough that Connor could see the Balkenkreuz markings on the turrets. Close enough to see the tank commanders' faces. He lifted the handset one more time. Fire on my position. The fire direction officer repeated the coordinates back to him. Connor confirmed. The officer asked him to confirm again. Calling artillery fire on your own position was not standard procedure. It meant friendly shells would land within yards of the observer. It meant the observer might die. Connor confirmed a 3rd time. 40 seconds later, the first shells landed 30 yards in front of his ditch. The concussion wave felt like being hit by a truck. The air pressure changed. His lungs compressed. His vision blurred. Frozen dirt and shrapnel screamed overhead. The sound was beyond thunder. It was the sound of the world ending. He stayed in the ditch. He kept the handset pressed to his ear. Drop 20. Repeat fire. The next salvo landed 20 yards out, close enough that he could feel the heat from the explosions, close enough that shrapnel tore through the air 6 feet above his head. If he stood up, he would be shredded. If the shells landed 10 yards closer, the ditch would not save him. The Tigers had stopped advancing. The tank commanders had buttoned up, closed their hatches. The artillery was landing too close. Even a Tiger crew did not want to be outside their armor when American shells were detonating at point-blank range. But the German infantry was rallying. Connor could see them forming up again, company-strength formation, maybe 200 soldiers who had survived the initial barrage. They were using the Tigers for cover, staying behind the massive tanks, moving when the tanks moved, using the armor as mobile fortresses. The attack was continuing. Connor adjusted fire. He walked the shells back and forth across the German advance. Every time a group of infantry tried to move forward, he dropped shells on them. Every time the Tigers advanced, he called fire directly in front of them. One Tiger took a direct hit on the turret. The shell did not penetrate, but the impact damaged the turret ring. The turret would not traverse anymore. The tank could only fire straight ahead, effectively useless. Another Tiger lost its second track. 2 broken tracks meant the tank could not move. The crew abandoned it. 5 men scrambled out of the hatches and ran back toward the German lines. American machine gun fire from the foxholes cut 2 of them down. The other 3 disappeared into the tree line. 3 Tigers remained operational, and the German infantry was getting closer. Connor could see individual faces now, 100 yards away, German soldiers crawling through the snow, using shell craters for cover, moving in small groups. They were trying to flank his position. If they got around him, they could cut the telephone wire. Once the wire was cut, the artillery would stop. The attack would succeed. The temperature was 10 degrees below zero. Connor had been lying in the ditch for 40 minutes. His hands were numb. His feet were numb. Every time a shell landed close, frozen dirt rained down on him. It got in his eyes, in his mouth. The handset was slippery with ice, but he kept calling fire. A shell landed 15 yards to his right, then another 15 yards to his left. The Germans had him bracketed. Their artillery observers had pinpointed his position. They were trying to kill him with counter-battery fire. German shells and American shells were landing in the same 100-yard radius. The ditch had become the focal point of 2 artillery barrages. Soldiers in 3rd Battalion's foxholes could see what was happening. A lone lieutenant lying in a ditch ahead of the American line, calling artillery on his own position. German shells trying to kill him. American shells landing so close that fragments were hitting the edge of his ditch, and he was not moving. He was not running. He was staying in place, adjusting fire, killing Germans. The German infantry pushed forward again, 80 yards away now, close enough that Connor could hear their officers shouting commands, close enough to hear the bolt actions on their Mauser rifles. He dropped the artillery another 10 yards. The shells landed between him and the advancing Germans, 60 yards from his position. The blast waves hammered him. Dirt cascaded into the ditch. Something hit his left shoulder, shrapnel or a rock. He could not tell. His shoulder went numb. He switched the handset to his right hand. The German advance stopped again. But they were not retreating. They were finding cover, waiting. They knew the American artillery observer had to be close. They knew if they could locate him, they could kill him. And once he was dead, nothing would stop them. The 3 remaining Tigers began advancing again. They had spread out, 50 yards between each tank, making themselves harder targets. They were 200 yards from the American foxholes now. Connor called fire on the leftmost Tiger, then the center Tiger, then the right. He was splitting the artillery between all 3 targets, trying to damage tracks, trying to damage optics, trying to slow them down. One shell hit the center Tiger's front glacis plate. The armor held, but the impact rocked the 60-ton tank backward. The driver lost control momentarily. The Tiger slewed left. Its track caught on a frozen stump. The track jammed. 2 Tigers still advancing, and the German infantry was inside 50 yards. The German officer leading the infantry advance was 30 yards from Connor's ditch. He could see the officer's face. Young, maybe 22 years old, probably a lieutenant. The officer was signaling his men forward with hand gestures. No shouting now. They were too close. Sound would give away their exact positions. 20 German soldiers were following the officer, crawling through the snow, rifles ready. They were moving in a skirmish line, trying to overwhelm Connor's position from multiple angles simultaneously. Connor cranked the handset. He gave new coordinates. Drop 5. Fire for effect. The shells landed 25 yards in front of him. The German officer disappeared in the explosion. So did 4 of his soldiers. The others went flat, pressed themselves into the snow, waited for the barrage to pass. But Connor did not let the barrage pass. He kept the shells falling, adjusted left, adjusted right, created a wall of explosions between himself and the German infantry. The shells were landing so close now that he could feel the heat on his face. Hot metal fragments were hitting the edge of the ditch. Some fragments were landing inside the ditch. One piece of shrapnel embedded itself in the frozen earth 2 inches from his right hand. The 2 remaining Tigers had closed to 150 yards from the American foxholes, close enough to use their machine guns effectively. The bow gunners opened fire. Sustained bursts from the MG-34 machine guns, 792 rounds per minute. The bullets tore through the tree line, chewed through logs, kicked up snow and dirt around the American positions. Soldiers in the foxholes returned fire, but rifle bullets could not hurt a Tiger. The American machine gunners tried to hit the Tiger's vision ports, hoping to blind the drivers, hoping to force the tanks to button up completely and slow their advance. It was not working. The Tigers kept rolling forward. Connor shifted fire back to the tanks. He called for smoke shells mixed with high explosive. The smoke would obscure the Tiger's vision, make it harder for the tank commanders to spot targets. The high explosive would continue to damage tracks and optics. The artillery battery complied. Smoke shells and HE shells began landing around the Tigers. White phosphorus smoke billowed up, thick, choking. The Tigers disappeared into the smoke cloud. But they were still coming. Connor could hear the engines, hear the tracks grinding through frozen earth. The smoke had not stopped them. It had only made them invisible. A Tiger emerged from the smoke cloud. 70 yards from the foxholes, the 88mm gun fired. An American machine gun position exploded. 3 soldiers dead. Connor called fire directly on the Tiger. Danger close. He specified the exact coordinates. The fire direction officer hesitated. Those coordinates were within 50 yards of Connor's position. The shrapnel radius of a 105 shell was 50 yards. Connor would be inside the kill zone. Connor repeated the coordinates. The shells landed. One shell hit 10 yards behind the Tiger. Another hit 15 yards to the left. A third shell landed directly in front of the tank. The explosion tore into the Tiger's front hull. The driver's vision port shattered. The tank swerved hard right. The driver was blind. The Tiger crashed into a crater and stopped. The crew tried to back out. The tracks spun. The tank was stuck. 1 Tiger remained, and the German infantry had regrouped. They were advancing again, this time from a different angle, using the smoke for cover. Connor could not see them. He could only hear them. Voices in the smoke, boots crunching through snow, the metallic click of rifle bolts. He estimated their position and called fire. The shells landed in the smoke. He could not see the results. He adjusted based on sound. When he heard voices to his left, he shifted fire left. When he heard movement to his right, he shifted fire right. The artillery battery was running low on ammunition. The fire direction officer reported they had maybe 15 minutes of sustained fire remaining. After that, they would need to pause to reload. 15 minutes without artillery support. The Germans would use that window to overwhelm the American positions. Connor had been in the ditch for 1 hour and 20 minutes. His assistant had joined him 40 minutes ago, a private from the battalion intelligence section. The private had low-crawled from the American foxholes with extra telephone wire and a backup handset. The private was lying 5 feet to Connor's right, watching for German infantry, calling out positions. The private spotted movement. 15 yards, German soldiers coming through the smoke. Connor called the coordinates. The shells landed 12 yards out. The concussion wave lifted both men off the bottom of the ditch. Dirt and ice and shrapnel filled the air. Something hit the private. The private screamed. Shrapnel had torn through his left leg. Blood poured into the snow. Connor grabbed the private and pulled him deeper into the ditch. The private was still conscious, still alive, but he needed a medic, needed evacuation. The private refused to leave. He stayed in the ditch, kept watching for Germans. His leg was bleeding, but he could still see, still call positions. The last Tiger was 60 yards from the American line now, and German soldiers were inside 10 yards of Connor's position. Connor dropped artillery 5 yards in front of his ditch. The shells landed closer than any previous fire mission. The blast lifted him completely off the ground. His body slammed back into the frozen earth. His ears went deaf. Complete silence. Then the ringing started, high-pitched, constant, drowning out every other sound. But the German soldiers who had been 10 yards away were gone. He cranked the handset. His hands were shaking. From cold or shock or exhaustion, he could not tell anymore. The fire direction officer's voice came through the handset, faint, distant, like the officer was speaking from another world. Connor adjusted fire back onto the last Tiger. The tank was 40 yards from the American foxholes now, close enough that its machine guns could suppress every defensive position, close enough that its main gun could destroy foxholes one by one at point-blank range. The Tiger's turret was traversing, looking for targets. The tank commander had his hatch open again. He was standing in the turret, scanning the American line, choosing which position to destroy first. Connor gave the coordinates, requested high explosive, maximum concentration, every gun the battery could bring to bear on a single target. 12 shells arrived simultaneously. The Tiger disappeared in a storm of explosions. When the smoke cleared, the tank was still there, still intact. The armor had held, but the tank was not moving. The driver's vision blocks were gone, shattered by shrapnel. The tank commander had dropped into the turret and slammed the hatch. The Tiger was blind and immobile. The crew abandoned the vehicle. 5 men scrambled out. They ran toward the tree line. American rifles fired from the foxholes. 3 German tankers went down. 2 made it to cover. All 6 Tigers were destroyed or abandoned. The German armor assault had failed, but the infantry was still fighting. Companies' worth of German soldiers were scattered across 300 yards of forest and field. They had taken massive casualties, at least 150 dead, maybe 200. But 400 soldiers remained, and they were veterans. They knew how to fight without tank support. They knew how to use terrain, how to find cover, how to advance under artillery fire. Connor shifted the barrage back to the infantry positions. He walked shells across the tree line where the Germans had taken cover, then across the shell craters where small groups were hiding, then across the approaches where reinforcements might advance. The fire direction officer reported 10 minutes of ammunition remaining. The battalion commander came on the radio net. He ordered Connor to withdraw, fall back to the American line. The artillery would lay down covering fire. Connor could make it back to the foxholes. Connor stayed in the ditch. From his position, he could see the entire German formation, could see every attempted rally, every movement, every attempt to reform for another assault. If he withdrew, the Americans would lose their forward observer. The artillery would fire blind. The Germans would exploit the gap. They would mass for one final push, and without accurate artillery fire, that push might succeed. The wounded private was still beside him, still conscious. The private's leg had stopped bleeding. The cold had frozen the wound. The private kept his rifle ready, watching the approaches. If German soldiers rushed the ditch, the private would fight. 2 hours had passed since Connor had left the command post. German artillery began falling again. The German observers had finally pinpointed Connor's exact position. Shells landed 20 yards behind the ditch, then 15 yards, then 10 yards. The Germans were walking their fire toward him, methodically, professionally. In another minute, the shells would land directly on the ditch. Connor called counter-battery fire. He gave the coordinates of the German artillery positions. The American guns shifted targets, began firing on the German howitzers 3 miles behind the German front line. The German artillery fire slackened, then stopped. The counter-battery fire was working. The German gun crews were taking cover, or dying. Connor shifted fire back to the German infantry. The sun had risen higher. Full daylight now. The Germans could see how many of them had died, could see the destroyed Tigers, could see the cratered forest, could see one American lieutenant lying in a shallow ditch with a telephone. One man, calling down thunder. A German squad tried one more time. 8 soldiers. They came from the left, running, trying to close the distance before Connor could adjust fire. They were 70 yards away when they broke cover. They made it 40 yards before the shells arrived. The squad disappeared. The explosions threw bodies into the air. No more German soldiers tried to advance. The fire direction officer reported 5 minutes of ammunition remaining. Then the guns would go silent. But the German attack had stalled. The surviving German soldiers were pulling back, moving away from the kill zone, dragging wounded comrades with them, leaving their dead behind. Connor kept the shells falling, pursued the retreating Germans, made sure they kept running, made sure they did not reform, made sure they understood that trying to attack 3rd Battalion's positions again would mean death. 3 hours after Connor had picked up the telephone and walked out of the command post, the German counterattack was over. Connor stayed in the ditch another 20 minutes, watching, making sure the Germans were not regrouping, making sure no follow-up attack was coming. The telephone handset was silent. The artillery battery had ceased fire. The guns needed to reload, needed to cool, needed to prepare for the next emergency. The battlefield was quiet. No engine sounds, no rifle fire, no explosions. Just wind moving through shattered trees, and the sound of wounded men calling for help. German voices, faint, distant, coming from the tree line 300 yards away. Connor finally stood up. His legs barely held him. 2 hours lying in frozen earth. His muscles had locked. His joints refused to bend. He took one step, then another. The wounded private tried to stand. Could not. Connor helped him up, supported his weight. They began walking back toward the American line. Soldiers emerged from the foxholes. They stared at Connor, at the ditch where he had been lying, at the cratered ground between the ditch and the German positions. The earth looked like the surface of the moon. Shell craters overlapping shell craters, destroyed equipment, pieces of Tigers scattered across 200 yards, bodies. The battalion commander met Connor at the foxhole line. The commander looked at the battlefield, looked at Connor, did not speak, just nodded. Medics took the wounded private to the aid station. The private would survive. The leg wound was clean, no broken bones. He would be back with the battalion in 6 weeks. Connor walked to the command post. His shoulder was still numb. Something had hit him. He could not remember when. During the 3rd hour, maybe the 4th. A medic examined the shoulder. Shrapnel, small piece, embedded just below the skin. The medic removed it, bandaged the wound, told Connor he was lucky. The intelligence section went forward after the German retreat. They counted bodies, counted destroyed equipment, made notes for the after-action report. 53 German soldiers confirmed dead, another 78 wounded, left behind when the Germans withdrew. The actual German casualties were higher. The Germans had dragged many of their dead and wounded back to their own lines during the retreat. Estimates put total German losses at over 150 killed and wounded. All 6 Tiger tanks destroyed or abandoned, 4 immobilized by artillery damage, 2 abandoned after catastrophic track failures. American recovery teams would salvage the Tigers later, strip them for intelligence, examine the armor, study the fire control systems. 3rd Battalion had lost 11 soldiers killed, 23 wounded. Most of the casualties had occurred before Connor reached the ditch, during the initial German artillery barrage. The Tigers had killed 3 more Americans before their destruction. After Connor began directing artillery, American casualties had stopped. The battalion remained on the line for another 8 days. The Germans did not attack again. They had lost too many men, too many tanks. The Colmar pocket offensive was over. The 19th Army would spend the next 2 weeks trying to hold their positions while the French 1st Army prepared for the final push. On February 10, 1945, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch presented Connor with the Distinguished Service Cross. Patch was the commander of 7th Army. He had come to 3rd Battalion specifically to present the award. The citation read, "Extraordinary heroism during the German counterattack on January 24th. It detailed Connor's advance under fire, his 3 hours directing artillery from an exposed position, his decision to call fire on his own position when the Germans closed to within yards. The battalion commander had recommended Connor for the Medal of Honor. The paperwork had gone up through division, through corps, through army, but the award timeline was too slow. Connor was being sent home. He had been in combat for 28 consecutive months. He had been wounded 7 times. The army was rotating him back to the United States. On March 15th, Connor left France. He sailed from Le Havre on a transport ship, arrived in New York 3 weeks later. He was honorably discharged on June 22, 1945. The war in Europe ended May 8th. Connor was already home, already trying to forget. Albany, Kentucky held a parade for him in May. The town honored their returning soldier. Alvin York spoke at the ceremony. York was the most famous Medal of Honor recipient from World War I. He had come from Pall Mall, Tennessee, 50 miles from Albany. York understood what Connor had done, understood the weight of it. Connor met a woman at the parade, Pauline Wells. She was 20 years old. She had heard the stories about Connor's service, had heard the medal citations read aloud during the ceremony. She could not believe the stories, could not believe that the quiet, 5'6" farmer standing in front of her had done what the officers described. Connor did not talk about the war. When people asked, he said he had left those memories across the Atlantic Ocean. He would not bring them home. He married Pauline on July 9, 1945. They lived on Indian Creek, several miles north of Albany, a farm with no electricity, no running water. They worked the land with mules and horses, tobacco, corn, the same crops Connor's family had grown for generations. In 1950, the government bought their property. Lake Cumberland was being created. The reservoir would flood their farm. They moved to the Roland community in southeastern Clinton County. Started again. New land, new crops, same life. Connor became president of the Clinton County Farm Bureau, held the position for 17 years. He helped other farmers, advised them on crop rotation, on soil conservation, on dealing with the agricultural bureaucracy. He was active in veterans organizations, Paralyzed Veterans of America, Disabled American Veterans. He traveled to nearby counties helping veterans file claims for benefits. He never talked about January 24, 1945. Pauline asked him once, early in their marriage, what had happened in France? What had he done to earn all those medals? Connor looked at her, said he had done what needed to be done. That was all there was to it. He would not elaborate. The medals stayed in a cardboard box, inside a duffel bag, in the back of the living room closet. Pauline knew they were there. She had seen them once. The Distinguished Service Cross, 4 silver stars, Bronze Star, Purple Hearts, the French Croix de Guerre. But Connor never displayed them, never mentioned them, never wore them. 53 years passed. In 1996, a veteran named Richard Chilton wrote to the Connor home. Chilton was researching his uncle, Private Gordon Roberts. Roberts had been killed at Anzio in January 1944. Chilton had learned that Roberts served with Connor. He wanted to know if Connor remembered anything about his uncle's final days. Connor invited Chilton to visit. They sat in the living room. Connor was 77 years old, diabetic, kidney failure. He had maybe 2 years left. Connor told Chilton about Anzio, about Roberts. Connor had carried Roberts to a medical aid station after Roberts was hit, had stayed with him until he died. As Connor spoke, he began to cry. 52 years later, and the memory still broke him. Pauline suggested Chilton look through Connor's military records. Maybe there would be information about Roberts. She brought out the duffel bag, the cardboard box. Chilton opened it, saw the medals, read the citations. His hands started shaking. He looked at Connor, then at Pauline, said one sentence. This man should have been awarded the Medal of Honor. Chilton began the process, filed paperwork with the Army Board for Correction of Military Records, gathered eyewitness statements from men who had served with Connor, built a case for upgrading the Distinguished Service Cross. The board rejected the application in 1997, rejected an appeal in 2000. Connor died November 5, 1998. He was 79 years old. He was buried in Memorial Hill Cemetery in Albany. The Distinguished Service Cross went with him. But Pauline did not stop. She collected more eyewitness accounts, found 3 soldiers who had been in the foxholes on January 24th, who had watched Connor in that ditch for 3 hours, who had seen what he did. She resubmitted the case in 2008. Nothing happened. Historians supported the upgrade. Authors, lawmakers. Stephen Ambrose wrote about Connor in 2000, called his actions far above the call of duty. The Rhode Island Senate passed a resolution in 2005 calling for the Medal of Honor. 7 retired generals endorsed the application. Still nothing. In 2014, Pauline sued the Army in federal court. A judge ruled she had waited too long. She appealed to the 6th Circuit Court. The case went to mediation. During the proceedings, the government attorney broke down crying. Her father had served in 3rd Battalion, had been wounded January 25th, one day after Connor's action. She said Connor might have saved her father's life. The Army Board finally recommended the upgrade in 2015. Congress passed legislation waiving the time limit. On March 29, 2018, the White House announced the award. On June 26th, President Trump presented the Medal of Honor to Pauline in the East Room. She was 89 years old. It had been 22 years since Chilton opened that cardboard box. 20 years since Connor died. The citation was read aloud. First Lieutenant Garland Merle Connor distinguished himself by acts of gallantry and intrepidity. Volunteered to run 400 yards through enemy fire. Directed artillery for 3 hours from an exposed position. Called fire on his own position. Killed 50 Germans. Stopped 6 Tiger tanks. Saved his battalion. Pauline held the medal. The medal her husband had never sought, had never mentioned, had left in a box for 50 years because he thought talking about it would be bragging. The 2nd most decorated soldier of World War II, after Audie Murphy, and almost no one knew his name. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about soldiers who saved battalions with telephone wire and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Garland Merle Connor doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.
Ever since the end of the Second World War, the United States has maintained a strong military presence in Germany. As of 2024, the country is thought to be home to about 50 U.S. military installations and over 50,000 personnel, making it the largest contingent of American troops in a single country in Europe. While originally meant to bulk up Western European defenses in the event of a Soviet invasion, the American bases in Germany have become the central hub for all U.S. military activity in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and its posturing against Europe, it doesn't look like American troops will be leaving Germany anytime soon. Germany is beautiful. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to spend more than a few days traveling in the country, but I know from my research and general experience that the culture, the food, the landscapes, all of it is very nice. Not to mention my growing appreciation for Germany's history dating back to the medieval period. So many of our modern fairy tales and children's stories come from Germany. And maybe there's a reason for that. According to German folklore, the forests and castles are home to all kinds of supernatural beings. Ghosts, witches, goblins, vampires, fairies, werewolves, shapeshifters. Even today, we might think many or all of these are just stories and nothing else, but they still give us the creeps. If you were to ask the servicemen in these following stories, however, these German folk tales aren't just myths or legends. In dark, remote areas that these men found themselves training in, childhood nightmares suddenly became very real. This is the Smoke Pit, and these are stories shared by servicemen about their encounters with strange things in Germany. It begins here. From the director of It comes It, Welcome to Derry, the chilling new HBO original series exploring one of horror's biggest terrors, Pennywise the Clown. Set in 1960s Derry, Maine, the new HBO original series premieres Sunday, October 26th on HBO Max, and listen to the official It, Welcome to Derry podcast wherever you get your podcasts. The Pale Crawler.
Let's keep the white lights off. I don't want to give away our position too early.
Roger that.
Hold up. Where's that coming from?
Sounded like it was over there. 2 o'clock. Tree line.
Might be a deer. If it's the sniper team, they are sloppy. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything on the nods. Switching to thermal.
There it is. You see it?
Yeah. Is that a person? What the hell is that?
He's standing up.
Sergeant, are we sure that's... Whoa! Wait, where'd he go?
Well, don't just stand there. Move. Let's go.
Yeah, Sergeant.
This first story was originally submitted to Nick Orton's Tales from the Grid Square Project. An anonymous soldier with the U.S. Army shared an unnerving experience he had while in Germany. Located in Bavaria, the Grafenwohr Training Area, or simply the GTA, was first established by the German military in 1910. Coming under new management in 1945, it is now known as the U.S. Army's largest and most advanced overseas training facility. With over 232 square kilometers of live-fire ranges, maneuver areas, and barracks, the base is often teeming with activity, both military and apparently paranormal. I'm not sure if you've had anyone in Germany see weird stuff, but this is my story. A few years ago, deep in the forests of the Grafenwohr Training Area in Germany, members of our recon and sniper teams were conducting a nighttime training exercise. The objective was straightforward. One team would set up a hidden surveillance site, and hours later, around 0100, 0300, another team would try to locate them. I was on the tracking team that night. We drove in quietly, parked the GMV, and continued on foot down a narrow, silent road. Our eyes were scanning the darkness using NVGs, thermals, and white light. The area was thick with tension, but it was no different than any other late-night exercise. Well, until it wasn't. We'd been walking for a while when we heard rustling in the tree line off to our right. At first, we thought it might be an animal, or maybe even one of the snipers moving around for counter-recon. I flicked my NVGs to thermal, the screen flickered, warmed, it lit up. And I saw it. Something was there, in the tree line. It looked human, at first. Pale, gaunt, too skinny. Its limbs were long, almost exaggerated, and it had the unmistakable posture of something trying and failing to mimic being human. As we approached, it stood upright, towering, slightly hunched, and motionless, just watching us. We were weirded out, but we just thought it was, one of our guys playing a part in the training scenario, so we didn't panic. But then, without warning, this thing just turned and bolted into the woods. It moved fast, like inhumanly fast. Within seconds, it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Probably more out of instinct than logic because of the training scenario, we took off after it. We chased it. Our boots are pounding through the underbrush as we are pushing deeper and deeper into the woods. And as we're running, out of nowhere, the night just explodes with a sound that I will never forget. It was a growl. A deep, guttural, just wrong growl. If I were to describe it, it sounded part human, but not. So part human, part beast. Whatever it was clearly not friendly, all malice. And this growl stopped us dead in our tracks. We all heard it, we had all seen it. We knew then that this wasn't part of the training exercise. This thing was clearly some kind of animal or God knows what. We pulled out of there as fast as we possibly could. Later that night, we got in contact with the other team, the ones we were supposed to be tracking. They were nowhere near our position. In fact, they'd been operating on the complete opposite side of the training area, and no one else was supposed to be out there. What's even more creepy was that this apparently wasn't the first time this thing had been seen. We found out later that some of the other guys in our platoon had reported seeing this same pale, skinny, human-like creature the year before. No one believed them then. Everyone just figured they were sleep-deprived or playing it up for laughs, but now? I can't speak for the other guys, but after that night, I didn't doubt them. We're trained observers, recon and sniper teams. We don't jump at shadows. We know what we see. And we saw something that night on the GTA that none of us could explain. The werewolf.
Terrified by the creature inside the house, the men grabbed their torches and set fire to it. They stood around and watched it burn to ashes. And that was that. Nothing and no one ever came out.
Damn. What a story. Actually, has me a little freaked out.
Yes, it's been passed around here for, I don't know, since I was a boy. Not many people like to talk about it, though.
Really? How come?
Because they're afraid, of course. Have you noticed that people around here don't like to stay out after dark? Or that we keep our distance from the woods? That story is more than just a legend to people in these parts.
Does that include you?
Well, yes. I probably shouldn't even be talking about it. To even mention the beast is supposed to bring bad luck. But it is probably just an old...
Hey, look. Do you see that? Down there. Something just came out of the tree line.
Richard, get inside. Right now.
What is...
I mean it. Now.
When I was reading the previous story about the Grafenvor training area, I couldn't help but notice striking similarities between the creature the soldiers saw and a creature commonly referred to as a rake or pale crawler. While they're typically associated with North American indigenous mythology, creatures similar to the pale crawler have also popped up in African, Arabic, Asian, and European folklore. The creature's personality and abilities vary between each culture, but what really struck me as interesting were the claims that some crawlers have the ability to shapeshift into human beings or various animals. German folklore, in particular, is full of legends about shapeshifting entities, the most infamous of which has to be the werewolf. From a modern perspective, werewolves have long been considered imaginary. But according to this next story, werewolves are more than just legends to those living in the towns and villages scattered across the German countryside. In some cases, it's something that they still live in fear of to this day. The account was sent to me a while back by a U.S. Army veteran named Richard. He writes, "While stationed in Germany, I caught the travel bug more than the stay in the barracks, drink yourself to death bug. I figured I'd have better adventures touring Europe that way. Being an amateur historian, I spent a lot of my time running around learning as much as I could that wasn't about World War I or World War II. I learned about the Roman colonization, architecture, Gaul, and the like. But I also learned about the myths and legends of the area as well. The usual stuff, monsters, myths, spooky castles. Hey, one in Europe, right? One afternoon, about midweek, I decided I wanted to go towards the city of Schwangau, where the fairy castle Neuschwanstein is located, or at least just outside of it. I figured I'd have a great time since it was winter, there were a lot of local festivals, parties, great food, and whatnot. I arrived and there was a light snowfall. I made it to the city and managed to relax a bit while I was there. I had the occasional Dunkelweissen beer and great food in the area I was staying at. I was staying at a local hostel. The hosts were a very nice couple who treated us well. I guess they appreciated that we weren't being jerks or, in their minds, typical Americans. That evening, I was on their balcony, which overlooks a small wooded area, and enjoying my host's company. This area I was in was a bit outside of town and more near the main highway or Autobahn. Some areas were well lit, others not so much. So, at some point in the conversation, my host asks me what brought me there. I said it was for the history, and that I also wanted to explore the area, and remembering some of the spooky myths I'd heard around town, I made some offhanded quip about hoping nothing too scary would get me this evening. At this, he laughed, and he said, "Well, historically, we have our fair share of monsters in this area. If you know your history, you know of the werewolf." Now, at the time, I didn't mind the tall tales and local legends, and being that we were enjoying a couple of drinks, I figured the more he had to drink, the better the story was going to be, so I casually sipped my glass and listened to him, and he did not disappoint. He started by explaining that the area used to be comprised of 3 villages back in the old days, and not one city as it was today. This was around the 14th or 15th century, so bear in mind that the passage of time tends to distort such records and stories. This is the story he told me. One summer day, the town was preparing for a big festival, since the Germans don't need much of an excuse to party. The harvest had been plenty, the work was about done, and things were looking great. The evening's festivities were scheduled to start with a gathering of all of the townsfolk and those of 2 adjacent towns coming for a great feast. But towards mid-afternoon, a small child wandered into the village, covered from head to toe in blood. The villagers raced to her, and they recognized her as being from the village nearest to them. They tried to help the child as much as they could, but she didn't survive. Before she died from her injuries, though, she told the villagers of a beast that massacred her entire village. Enraged, the townsfolk grabbed their weapons and set out to hunt this thing down. On their way, they encountered several farms, which had also been massacred. Whole herds of cattle were wiped out, and the homes were barely standing. There was a corpse that looked like a pack of wolves tore it limb from limb. After reaching the second town, the result was the same. The village had been wiped out, and there wasn't a single living soul around. No animals, no people, nothing. Just the smell of blood, body parts, and a dead silence filling the air. The hunting party decided to go towards the third and furthest village to see if it had been spared. They were not. At first, it seemed like everyone here had also been wiped out. But then, something started moving. The town's main hall was mostly still intact, and there were signs of life coming from inside. After the hunting party's leader called out, they were met with a bone-chilling howl from within the residence. One of the men attempted to storm the hall in an effort to try and slay the creature inside, but he was instantly thrown back through the front door, which then slammed shut. Terrified, the posse then set fire to the building and watched it burn to ashes. And that was that. Nothing ever came out of it. When he finished telling the story, it had me feeling a bit creeped out. I asked the guy if he had any other stories to share. He told me that people around the town don't like going out at night. Something about it just doesn't feel right at times, even for those who grew up there. He said that to even speak about the werewolf invites all kinds of bad luck. And it was at that moment that I caught sight of something and pointed it out to him over the edge of the balcony. This thing, I can only describe it as being of unnatural height and posture, was looking at us from the tree line. We watched it step out into the moonlight, and it looked like it was observing us. It was sniffing the air. The ears were on top of its head, and they were kind of twitching like a dog. And when my host saw it, he immediately told me to get inside. And not knowing what else to do, I did, and he quickly followed me in. Whatever this thing was disappeared back into the woods. And I don't know who called them, but the police arrived on the scene a little while later and began a thorough search of the area around this guy's house. The officers were carrying automatic rifles and shotguns. They were G36s, which I kind of thought was odd since those were typically assigned to the German army. I'd never seen them carried by local police forces, at least that's my understanding. This was different though. The police officers' mannerisms, posture, the way they were moving around the area through the forest, it was as if they were actually hunting for something. The police patrolled the area for maybe 2 to 3 hours before piling back into their vehicles and leaving. From the house, I could only see about 3 officers, but I'd venture to say there were a lot more based on all the police activity in the area. As they were leaving, it looked like they were trying to cover up tracks or something. From the balcony, we watched as they scanned the ground and were kicking dirt and snow over certain areas. This made us curious, but there was no way we were going to go out there then to investigate this while it was still dark. The next morning, my host and I found some courage and we went to go check out the forest. We searched the ground and found a single print that the police clearly didn't catch. So I wear a size 10.5 wide to 11 wide boot, depending on the manufacturer. This print went from the tip of my toes to about mid-heel, but the width was, by my best guess, about 1/2 inch wider on both sides. It was large and definitely not human. The best way I could describe it would be if you took a wolf's footprint and applied it to a PowerPoint presentation, stretched it width-wise beyond the size of a coffee can, and elongated the toes. I even remember seeing very distinct nail marks. I'm happy to say that the encounter didn't stop me from traveling the area. I even stayed there again from time to time and drank with some of the same people. But I will never forget that moment. I know, it is a very wild story, and I can't begin to make sense of it. Over the fence.
Jeez.
You want to get on the wire and tell command that we got 3 super dead deer inside the perimeter?
What do you think could have done this? It's like a whole pack of wolves got to them.
Probably some of those wild boars we got running around here. Those things can get nasty sometimes.
I didn't know pigs ate deer.
Yeah, pretty sure.
That's wild.
Yeah, at least I think so. You can ask the Forestmeister when he gets here.
But are they vicious enough to kill 3 of them like? You still think it was a pig?
Command, this is P4. We found some mutilated deer over by the southern fence line break, and we just heard what sounds like a wolf inside the perimeter. How copy? Over.
Roger that, P4. We heard it as well. Report back to security control and arm up. I would start moving back towards the command post. Over.
This next story was originally shared by an Air Force veteran on unexplainedmysteries.com back in 2012. The actual events had taken place in the late 1980s. The story provoked readers to discuss its correlation with another story about a creature known as the Moorbach Monster, this being one of the more well-known, much more recent werewolf legends. The veteran's story takes place on the grounds of Hahn Air Force Base in western Germany, near the town of Wittlich. One night in 1988, a few airmen were making their way back to base after a night out on the town. As they walked along a forest path, they passed a small shrine tucked into the brush. According to locals, the shrine had been placed there long ago as a way to ward off the vengeful spirit of a werewolf. According to the myth, so long as the eternal flame at its center kept burning, the beast would be kept at bay. There was only one problem. That night, for whatever reason, the eternal flame had burned out. Under the influence of a few drinks, the airmen started egging each other on and then approached the shrine. They made off-colored jokes and called out the supposed werewolf, daring it to come forward. Nothing happened, and so the men went on their way, laughing it all off as a good joke. But according to a member of the 50th Security Police Squadron stationed at Hahn Air Force Base in 1988, writing under the handle of Sierra 7, their little joke didn't turn out to be as funny as they thought. He writes, "When we first came on duty, my patrols would do a sweep of their assigned sectors. As I was in the security trailer reading the previous shift's logs, one of my foot patrols found 3 dead deer within one of the wooded areas and radioed us. When I arrived on scene, I noticed that their throats were damaged and 2 had their entrails and hindquarters eaten, along with what appeared to be their internal organs, liver, heart. We did have wild boars, in and out of the area that sometimes went after small deer species like these. We placed a call to the local forestmeister, basically a forest ranger, so he could remove the deer carcasses. I went back to the security control trailer to phone the base about the incident. After that, I radioed all patrols for an area briefing at control. As the patrols rolled in, we heard a low but loud growl/howl coming from the direction of our only alarmed structures. I radioed the foot patrol assigned to that area since they were still on their way. And as I did, they came running out of the darkness, yelling, "Did you guys hear that?" About that time, it howled again. It sounded like it was within our fence line. I called the entry control point to see if they had permitted any canine patrols in the area. They said no, and also reported having heard the howling. One of the guys said, "What if it's the werewolf?" And we all kind of laughed. But then it howled again, this time from the center of the site. I called the base to inform them that we had a breach of some kind of animal, probably some kind of large dog. They stated that the forestmeister had been called and was on his way. I asked the patrols if they wanted me to turn on the area lighting, and they said no. The area lighting usually made matters worse since they cast too many shadows and often messed with our night vision. I issued night vision scopes to our patrol leaders, which mounted onto our M16s. I informed them that they did not have permission to lock and load. Since it was peacetime, Cold War, we carried our weapons with a loaded magazine, weapon on safe, and no round in the chamber. I took one of the foot patrols with me, strength in numbers, and headed to the perimeter in case this thing tried to circle my guys. I went by the fallen deer to show the patrol, and when we got there, I noticed that the third deer had also now been eaten. I immediately notified all the patrols that whatever this was had come back and fed on the third deer. About that time, one of the mounted patrols had made contact and said over the radio that they were pursuing a large canine. We ran in a circular route to try to outflank whatever it was that they were chasing. The entry gate radioed me, saying that our own canine patrol had arrived and I had them dispatched to the western fence line since that's where we were all going. The pursuing patrol radioed that this thing was now turning towards the command trailer. Here's the funny part. Alpha Control, who was inside the trailer, radioed that he was locking down and wasn't opening the door until daylight. I took the foot patrol and headed to the fence line, since we had two patrols going back to control. The canine patrol was already there at the fence, so I dispatched him back to the alarmed structures to stand by. I did this since those structures were between control and the perimeter fence. When we got to the fence, I put one of the guys near the perimeter, and the patrol leader and I headed to a small hill to overwatch his position. Around that time, I started to hear a lot of yelling from the other patrols, so I got on the radio and asked for a situation report, and the response back was that this thing was now heading toward us. I radioed control to turn on our sector's lighting. Our area was mostly open, with trees on the right side. Me and the patrol leader went to switch off our scopes, and that's when the guy that we left at the fence line started screaming. We turned in time to see a huge, dark mass clear our 9-foot fence. It quickly faded from our perimeter lighting out into the darkness. I immediately asked for the area lighting to be turned back off. I walked further up the hill and switched on my night scope. I looked in the direction this thing had run, and that's when I saw it. It was leaned up against a tree, looking at us, standing on its hind legs. I yelled out its position at 2 o'clock, 200 meters, and it just kind of turned and faded into the leaves. To my knowledge, only one other patrol leader saw it. It was around 2:30 a.m. when the Forestmeister arrived at the entry gate. I had to go sign him in, so I asked the canine unit to do a foot patrol along the fence line. But the dog was really spooked. Poor thing just retreated into his kennel and refused to come out. I put all units back on active patrol and told them to remain extra vigilant. As I escorted the Forestmeister to the dead deer, I explained what had happened. He listened carefully and seemed to be taking it all in. He took pictures of the deer for the records and then bagged up the bodies. He said that it didn't appear to be the work of a wild boar. It had all the markings of a wolf attack. But the Meister himself was a bit confused. He said wolves usually didn't kill their prey outright. Their typical MO was to wound the animal and wait for it to collapse from shock or blood loss before eating the hindquarters while it was still alive. But it looked as if this one just straight up killed the deer and started eating, as evidenced by the neck injuries. I asked if wolves could jump a 9-foot fence. He shrugged and said, "This one could," and laughed. The guys were jazzed, to say the least. We had a group meeting around 4 a.m., and I told everyone that I needed written reports by shift's end at 06:30. Alpha 2, the guy who locked himself in the command trailer and said he wasn't coming out till sunrise, eventually came out. I remember sitting there sipping some coffee saying, "Are they going to believe this?" He said that we were definitely all going to have to pee in a bottle. That meant a urinalysis to see if we were on drugs. We had a good laugh about it. When we got back to the armory, I was pulled aside by my flight chief and my shift commander. I briefed them on what had happened, and my flight chief asked me to take home the statements and proofread them first before turning them in before guard mount. The following day, I noticed that the roster had been amended. We were all going back to Moorbach. It was very rare to have the same patrol twice, let alone being assigned to the same area. The bus ride out there was pretty quiet. When we approached the little shrine on the side of the road, I stopped the bus at the altar to make sure that the candle was lit. I wasn't taking any chances. The flight chief showed up around midnight, and we had a powwow regarding the previous night. He said we had two choices. We could turn in the statements, but omit the werewolf references, or shred the statements and write in the logbook that a wild animal had killed some deer in the wooded area behind the ammo building, and that the Forestmeister had been dispatched. End of story. We kind of just looked at each other, and he stated that if we went with the werewolf thing, our PRP would be called into question. PRP, Personnel Reliability Program, is what enables us to work around nuclear resources often found on Air Force bases. To lose your PRP could cast a dark cloud over your whole career. Plus, you got crap details while you were being reevaluated, which usually took up to 45 days. So we opted for the latter. Some of us chose not to talk about it, but obviously some did. It really happened. It wasn't some story to scare the Jeeps. Jeeps are FNGs, rookies, etc. Was it a werewolf? Was it an endangered European wolf? Was it a coincidence that the candle was out that night of a full moon? I'm not really sure. I'll just say this. The above statement is true, to the best of my knowledge. When I was researching the story of the Moorbach monster, I was interested and no less surprised to find that the legend appears rooted in a degree of truth. According to various articles, the myth can be traced all the way back to the year 1812 and centers around the story of a man named Thomas Johann Baptist Schweitzer. Born in the Alsace region of France in 1785, Schweitzer joined Napoleon Bonaparte's Grand Army as a teenager, and by 1812, he was a battle-hardened veteran of numerous campaigns. But after Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia, Schweitzer decided that he had had enough of military life. As the Grand Army retreated through Germany, Schweitzer and a small band of men abandoned their posts and fled into the countryside, soon finding themselves on the outskirts of Wittlich, the same town where the Hahn Air Force Base was located in 1988. The deserters, driven by hunger and desperation, decided to raid a farmhouse for supplies, but things didn't go according to plan. After hearing the commotion, the farmer and his sons rushed in and confronted the bandits. Now panicked, Schweitzer and his gang attacked the family, brutally murdering the father and each of his children. It was only after they stopped screaming that Schweitzer noticed the boy's mother. She was standing in the farmhouse doorway, a look of stunned terror on her face. But as she approached, her fear turned into pure rage. With her last breath, the woman was said to place a curse on Schweitzer, stating that on every night of a full moon, he'd change into a rabid wolf. Schweitzer finished her off with a single blow to the head. As the story goes, the woman's death didn't stop the curse from taking full effect. As time went by and the moon came out, Schweitzer began to change. His body twisted and grew into that of a werewolf, driven only by rage and insatiable bloodlust. For many nights, this creature rampaged through the countryside. Entire herds of livestock were found slaughtered, and soon the mutilated bodies of men and women were turning up. But Schweitzer's growing depravity wasn't limited to murder. One night, he set his sights on a young woman named Elizabeth Byerly as she made her way home along a forest trail. Stepping out of the darkness and stopping Elizabeth in her tracks, Schweitzer, or the thing that used to be Schweitzer, lunged forward and tackled the defenseless woman to the ground. He didn't kill her. What he did was arguably worse. For many villagers in the Rhineland, this was the last straw. Arming themselves with muskets, torches, pitchforks, and plenty of silver, they set out to hunt down the werewolf once and for all. They finally found the beast hiding in the forests near the village of Moorbach. The battle that followed was brutal, but in the end, the villagers prevailed. Schweitzer's reign of terror was over. Or so they thought. In order to prevent the werewolf's spirit from lingering, they decapitated the body and drove a stake through its heart before burying it beneath a remote crossroads. On its grave, a small shrine was erected, adorned with an image of the Virgin Mary. At its center, a lone candle would burn with an eternal flame that kept the evil spirit at bay. Whether this candle actually worked, that remains to be seen. Hey guys, thank you for sticking around here for the after action in the credits. In conjunction with a previous episode we did in Germany on various encounters military personnel had with the Aufhocker, which is essentially a German skinwalker variant, or probably what would be called a werewolf. These additional stories just seem to paint a picture of Germany being home to many of these creatures. I guess dogman would be another term for it. But yes, German folklore might have its roots in some degree of truth based on these stories. A lot of wolf stories out of Germany. Now, as discussed in the episodes on wolf attacks, obviously these stories could be derived from a history of medieval peasants fighting off bands of man-eating wolves. Jake, our writer, is recently engaged. Congrats, Jake. And his fiancée is apparently big into criminal psychology, and he told me that she made an interesting point when he discussed this episode with her. She pointed out that the idea of serial killers has only been studied within the past 100 years or so. So with the story of Thomas Schweitzer, It's interesting to think that in the early 1800s, people simply couldn't fathom the idea of a person being capable of such heinous crimes as serial killers now. They'd come across this brutal scene splattered with gore and mutilated bodies, and they would maybe try to rationalize it as the work of a wild beast, an animal, and not a human. So Schweitzer might just have been a deranged serial killer in his time, but to make sense of just how evil he was, people depicted him as a beast, or a man afflicted by some kind of supernatural evil. Possibly this happened years after the events happened, and hence his modern depiction as a werewolf. Jake's fiancé might be onto something, because I looked into some other German stories about actual werewolf trials and accusations, and found the story of Peter Stump. Peter was a wealthy German farmer in the late 16th century and became known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. In 1589, he was accused of horrifying crimes, including serial murder, cannibalism, witchcraft, and incest. He was severely tortured to get his confession, but he admitted to practicing black magic since age 12 and claimed the devil gave him a magical belt that transformed him into a wolf. Over a period of 25 years as a wolf, Stump confessed to murdering and eating 14 children and 2 pregnant women, even consuming the fetuses, and shockingly the brain of his own son. He also admitted to an incestuous relationship with his daughter and relations with a succubus. On October 31st, Halloween, 1589, Stump endured a brutal execution. His flesh was torn with hot pincers, his limbs were broken, and he was finally beheaded, and his body was burned. His daughter and mistress were also executed alongside him. Some scholars propose that Stump might have been singled out for execution to ritually purge the community of evil. Also, there was a religious war raging in Europe at the time, the Cologne War, with the Catholic faction having gained control of the Bedburg region by 1589. It is thought that a brutal trial and execution like Stump's could possibly have served to deter Protestants from rebellion, thereby reinforcing Catholic power. There was one scholar who disputed this, stating that Stump was simply prosecuted for being a quote-unquote moral reprobate, rather than as a warning to Protestants. Peter Stump's case is documented in a 1590 pamphlet and other historical records, and it depicts a grim picture of what justice looked like in that era. In hindsight, as with Thomas Schweitzer, many would call him a serial killer. But like I said, others suggest that Peter was a scapegoat during religious conflicts, or that the werewolf label was applied later. So who knows how many other serial killer stories like these might exist where things got misconstrued or they were just deranged and claimed to be werewolves. But none of that really offers a sound explanation for the strange creatures that these and other soldiers have described encountering in Germany. Many more stories to come. Thank you for watching, for listening, for sharing, subscribing, liking, commenting, everything and anything you guys do to help support the channel. It is sincerely appreciated. As always, a huge shout out to both our Patreon and YouTube channel members for their incredible support. May God be with you no matter what you are dealing with, and I will see you in the next episode.